So the first well-being indicator that I am going to speak to you about is jobs. Well, two indicators, jobs and income. I think it's pretty clear why these um, are used to indicate well-being in a nation or state, because in a nation or state where the people have stable jobs and steady income, they are more likely to contribute positively to the state's economic and social development. I think that's pretty clear. So, in the case study of the OECD, I hope I got those letters right. Income and jobs are both on the rise, with the unemployment rate and average how with the employment rate, and average household incomes increasing since 2010 by over 5 percentage points. This is a very, very good sign. And today in 2020, almost 8 in every 10 adults are in paid employment. However, in this paid employment, there still tends to be a huge, a mile. I wouldn't say huge. It's less significant in OECD countries than it is in many other countries, especially second and third world countries. However, there is still quite a big gender disparity, and especially when you look at the differences between paid and unpaid labor. So, more women will be working but unpaid, and more men will be working in the paid fields, despite the fact that most members of the population, most adults, are working class. Are working, not necessarily working class, at whatever um, level of the economy they may be working. Um, yeah, some of the most equal countries have experienced little change in this since 2010, in the 10 years since 2010. And some of them have even had widening inequalities. Sweden and Denmark, renowned for their high quality of life, have recently experienced rising income inequality from a gender perspective, um, and falls in social support, as well as an increase in those reporting very low life satisfaction. Nearly two-thirds of people in OECD countries are exposed to dangerous levels of air pollution. Therefore, although there is like a lot of employment and people are getting steady incomes, there are still risks caused by the jobs. And therefore, it indicates high levels of well-being on one hand. However, if you look at exactly where the jobs are, it may indicate a lower level of well-being for certain people than others. For some people, did that make sense? Yes. Anyway, the next indicator is housing. 1 in 8 households have overcrowded conditions in OECD states. That's 3 percentage points fewer than in 2010. So that indicates an improvement. Household debt in almost two-thirds of OECD countries exceeds annual household disposable income and has deepened in a third of member states since 2010. Therefore, despite the fact that there are fewer people depending on one home, the debt has increased. Lastly, we'll take a look at community. This indicator of well-being has quite a few things to do with it, because community involves, jobs in the community, income levels in the community, housing in the community, security in the community, the environment of the community, and therefore it brings together quite a few other indicators. Yes, so in OECD states, homicide rates have reduced by a third since 2010, which is a good indicator of the well-being on a community level. Showing an increase in development, as well as the fact that life expectancy has increased to 80. Road deaths are down, and people claim to feel safer when walking alone at night in their neighborhoods. I don't know about you, but being able to walk alone at night in one's neighborhood is, to me, one of the most important indicators of well-being and development in a nation state. However, people spend around 6 hours per week interacting with friends and family, a tiny fraction of the time they spend working. Therefore, they spend a lot more time doing their jobs and less time doing things they more likely enjoy. Especially when you take into consideration unpaid household work, people spend a lot of time doing paid work, and then even more time doing unpaid work that isn't really counted as part of the economy. And Therefore, this may affect the level of satisfaction. Deaths of despair, which are deaths by suicide or alcohol and drug abuse, um, still a very small share of overall deaths, has still risen in some countries, and the average toll of such deaths is 3 times higher than for road deaths and 6 times higher than death from homicide. This shows quite a problem, especially when you consider the fact that deaths from suicide, alcohol, and drug abuse indicate mental health issues being pervasive in the community. Um, Furthermore, less than half of the population across the OECD countries trust their institutions, their political institutions, which is a very important indicator of development in a community or the well being of a community, trust in political institutions. And only 1 in 3 people feel they have a say in what their government does. Women hold just 1/3 of all seats in OECD parliaments, and hence inclusive decision making remains a distant goal. Therefore, if we're looking at community overall, I mean, a few things have improved, but there's still quite a bit of disparity, and the fact that people do not necessarily trust in their political leaders is not a very good indication of development on this level.
Moving on to education, the first dimension. We all know the importance of education. Better education means higher wages and higher probability of finding a job. It also means longer life and better health. And if people and citizens are educated, there will be active participation in politics, fewer crimes, and less reliance on social assistance. The country will also benefit from education from a broader sense, because if people are educated, there will be higher GDP growth because of lots of employment and higher tax revenues and lower social expenditures. So the indicators of education. So these are just some of the indicators that the OECD uses to measure education in the different OECD member countries. And moving on to the inequalities in education. So it's been noted that women are more educated in the OECD countries where it's more developed. So you can see a pattern here. And it's also said that girls have higher reading competencies but often lower math skills. And children of immigrant origins display lower competencies than children of native born. And this is a report from OECD 2010. And we can see that not enough opportunities and facilities are being provided for the immigrant children, and hence the lower display of competency. And cognitive skills are strongly influenced by the social economic background, particularly in Hungary, Belgium, Turkey, Chile, Luxembourg, and Germany. So how do they measure education? There are a lot of programs that were initiated by the OECD, such as the PISA, which is Program for International Student Assessment. And this is very important because it was established not only in the OECD countries, but then the OECD countries works with other non-members such as the G20 nations and other countries. So the OECD policies sometimes are also adopted by non-member countries. So the large majority of the adult population in OECD countries holds at least an upper secondary education degree. This proportion is above 90% in Czech Republic, but is below 35% in Portugal, Turkey, and Mexico. The share of the adult population who has reached at least upper secondary education has increased by around 9 percentage points in the OECD as a whole over the past 10 years, with larger increases in Ireland, Spain, Hungary, and Korea, and small declines in Denmark. In Brazil, the only emerging country with comparable information, educational attainment level is similar to that of the OECD countries with the least educated population and has not recorded significant changes in the recent period. So we're looking at changes over the period of 2000 to 2009. Chile, Israel, Portugal, and Poland recorded substantial improvements, while substantial declines occurred in Ireland and Sweden. So these trends have led to a small decline in cross-country differences. In emerging countries, reading scores are generally lower than in OECD countries, but have risen significantly in some of them, as for instance in Brazil and Indonesia. Now we'll be moving on to the second index, which is civic engagement. Now, civic engagement is a basic human right. We all know that. It is important because it enhances the accountability and the effectiveness of public policy. It it hence kind of doesn't protect transparency, I guess. So public policy has a strong bearing on individual lives. Example, through the public services provided, the regulation and framing of various institutions and markets are taking place. And community participation allows individuals to develop a sense of belonging and trust in others. So, some of the indicators that civic engagement exists in the country are voter turnout and stakeholder engagement for developing resolutions. So, voter turnout is a percentage of the registered population that voted during an election. And stakeholder engagement for developing regulations are measures to what extent a country's executive branch engages with stakeholders while making primary laws and policies. So some of the inequalities in civic engagement in the countries are lower income people usually have lower rates of voting. And education is very important because electoral participation increases with age. In principle, the existence of open consultation process, which refers to the existence of institutional practices in the design of policies, benefits all citizens of a given jurisdiction, although not all individuals may get to avail themselves to the opportunities that exist. So civic engagement, even though it exists, it can be limited by cultural, institutional, and historical context. So indicators of the quality of governance should measure whether public policy is effective and transparent in achieving its goals. So when we talk about civic engagement in a broader sense, um, we can think of governance, and sometimes based on the specific survey modules, governance are only available for a few OECD countries, which is interesting. Um, So partly because of differences in the electoral systems, participations vary substantially across OECD countries. In general, voter turnout is high in Nordic countries and low in Eastern European countries. Despite these differences in levels, many OECD countries experience declining levels of participation over the past three decades after a long increase in previous decades. So the pattern of political participation is mixed in emerging countries. Brazil and Indonesia display very high voter turnout. Conversely, India and the Russian Federation record relatively low levels of electoral participation. Most OECD countries experienced important progress in enhancing the transparency of their primary and subordinate regulations, but large disparities across countries remain. The openness of consultation has significantly increased in Australia, the Czech Republic, and Mexico between 2005 and 2008, while it has significantly decreased in Finland, the Netherlands, and Slovak Republic and Switzerland. In South Africa, the only emerging country with available information, consultation, project procedures, and rulemaking are not widespread. So the third dimension is environment. So the impact of environmental pollutants on health. That's why environment is important. People attach importance to the beauty and the cleanliness of the place where they live. Plus, environment provides a lot of materials for our day-to-day living, so we need to take care of it. The indicator of environmental quality here refers to the population-weighted average concentrations of fine particles (PM10) in the air we breathe. So both quality of different environmental media, soil, water, air, and people's access to environmental amenities, as well as people's subjective appreciations of the environment where they live, such as the places like where the home is and the schools, are very important. And the indicators for environmental quality usually look out for the different mediums as well as the presence of problems such as air pollution, water quality, and forest content. Some of the inequalities of environment are, well, first of all, health problems, obviously, risks and severity of adverse health consequences due to exposure to air pollution differ across people, depending on their characteristics, biological susceptibility, and capacity to cope with risk and outcome. The effects of PM are more severe on subjects with low socioeconomic status due to a combination of greater susceptibility, higher exposure, and worse access to healthcare. We can look at India in this case, whereby there are a lot of environment and surroundings where it's not very safe and clean. And there we can also see the sort of lifestyles that the people lead and the diseases that they might also go through and that they do go through. So in the last 2 decades, PM10 organizations have significantly decreased in many OECD countries, yet they are still above the annual guideline limit of 20 PM10 set by the WHO. Across OECD countries, the highest concentration levels are found in Chile, Turkey, and Poland. PM10 concentrations have drastically declined in Estonia, Czech, and Slovak republics, mostly as a result of structural shifts in the economy and the introduction of a new vehicle engine technologies, but also in Chile, Mexico, Greece, and Israel. So we have more details that you guys can go through later. And now moving on to subjective well-being or life satisfaction. So as you can understand from the very word itself, it usually talks about the subjective well-being of an individual that they think is like okay. So it captures the notion that what matters in a good life is not the presence of a set of circumstances and opportunities, but how these have impacts on people and their life. It also captures reflective assessments of how things are going in one's life and allows assessing which life circumstances and conditions are important for subjective well-being. It also helps understanding the gap between objective living conditions of the people and their own evaluation of these conditions. So the indicator is it is measured by the Cantril ladder, also referred to as a self-anchoring striving scale, whereby people are just asked to rate their life in terms of best possible life, 10, through to the worst possible life, 0. While the gantry ladder represents the best available measure of overall life satisfaction, this is very subjective and can be affected by a lot of factors. So it might not necessarily be very objective, but then the OECD is working towards making a well-being measurement right now. So some of the inequalities are while some OECD countries have a relatively equal distribution of life satisfaction, example the Netherlands and most of the Nordic countries, other countries like Slovenia, Portugal, Chile, and Brazil display a much greater variance, whereby those who are happy are very happy and those who are sad are very sad. Countries with less equal distribution of life satisfaction tend to have a lower average level of life satisfaction, with the exceptions of Mexico, Chile, and Brazil, combining relatively high variance in life satisfaction scores and very different average levels of life satisfaction. Higher among more educated individuals and higher income people. You can understand that. And the relationship between age and life satisfaction is U-shaped. And women also tend to be more satisfied than men. So among OECD countries, the gap countries with the highest life satisfaction and those with the lowest is approximately 3 points on the 11-point scale. Hungary, Portugal, Turkey, and Estonia have a relatively low average life satisfaction compared to other developed countries with average scores of less than 5.5. The group of countries reporting the highest life satisfaction comprises predominantly of the Nordic countries and English-speaking countries, which have scores of over 7. Some Asian countries have lower levels of life satisfaction than might be expected given their level of economic development. Both Japan and Korea report a life satisfaction score half a point below the OECD average. And China has the lowest reported life satisfaction of all the countries covered, despite being wealthier than India or Indonesia. By contrast, a number of Latin American countries, including Chile, Brazil, and Mexico, have relatively high average levels of life satisfaction compared to the level of economic development. So these are the four index that were given to me, but then we'll also share articles and our documents with you guys.
So I'm going to be talking about the last three indices left. So first, we're going to talk about health. Health is a Health is one of the most important things to people and also brings many other benefits, including enhancing access to education and the job market, an increase in productivity and wealth, reduced healthcare costs, good social relation, and of course, a longer life. There are a few categories in which health can be measured in. One of them is life expectancy. It is the most widely used measure of health, although it only takes into account the length of people's life and not the quality of their lives. Um, Another one is self-reported health. Most OECD countries conduct regular health surveys which allow respondents to report on different aspects of their health. One of the most commonly asked questions in these questionnaires are, how is your health? And it is one way of collecting data on a self-preserved health status. Um, we're gonna talk about safety next. So safety is a personal safety. It's personal security in a core element for the well-being of individuals and includes the risk of people being physically assaulted or falling victims to other types of crime. Crime may lead to loss of life and property as well as physical pain, post-traumatic stress and anxiety. One of the biggest impacts of crime on people's well-being appears to be through the feeling of vulnerability that it causes. Some of the ways safety can be measured is if a person feels safe walking alone at night. According to recent data, about 68% of people in OECD countries say that they feel safe walking alone at night. Homicide rates are also another way to test safety of a OECD country. Homicides rate, which is present in the numbers of murder per 1 lakh inhabitants, only represent the most extreme form of contact crime and thus do not provide information about more typical safety conditions. They are, however, more reliable measure of a country's safety level because unlike other crimes, murders are actually reported to police. According to the latest OECD data, the average homicide rate in OECD countries is 3.7 murders per 1 lakh inhabitants. So now we're going to talk about the last well-being index, which is work-life balance. Finding a suitable balance between work and daily life is a challenge that all workers face. Families are particularly affected. The ability to successfully combine work, family commitments, and personal life is important for the well-being of all members in a household. Governments can help to address the issue by encouraging supportive and flexible working practices, making it easier for parents to strike a better balance between work life and home life. So some of the ways you can measure this is employees working long hours. An important aspect of work-life balance is the amount of time a person spends at work. Evidence suggests that long work hours may impair personal health, jeopardize safety, and increase stress. 11% of employees in the OECD work 50 hours or more per week. As it can be seen, Turkey is by far the country with the highest proportion of people working very long hours. Also, time devoted to leisure and personal care comes under this. Furthermore, the more people work, the less time they have to spend on other activities such as personal care or leisure. The amount and quality of leisure time is important for people's overall well-being and can bring additional physical and mental health benefits. A full-time worker in the OECD countries devotes 63% of the day on average, or 15 hours, to personal care, which can include eating, sleeping, and etc., and leisure, which is socializing with friends and families, hobbies, games, computer and television use, etc. As time devoted to leisure is roughly the same for men and women across 20 OECD countries as studied. Thank you very much.